Story 1. It was one of those assignments that seemed designed to make you roll your eyes. A task so pointless that you could almost hear the groans echo through the lecture hall when it was announced. We were supposed to write an obituary for a deceased grandparent. Great, I thought, except all mine were still kicking, and the idea of crafting a fake obituary for one of them seemed morbid at best. Naturally, I let it slide until the night before it was due. Around 10 p.m., I finally decided to get my act together. I figured my maternal grandpa would be the easiest target. He had a straightforward life, not much mystery there. So I gave my mom a quick call, fishing for details. She knew I'd put it off till the last minute, and she was irritated, rattling off my grandpa's career history as if it were a shopping list. But then she hit a snag. She couldn't remember the name of one of the companies he'd worked for. She grumbled about the hour. It was already 10:30 p.m. where my grandparents lived, and she wasn't thrilled about the idea of calling that late. Still, with a sigh that said, "Why do I put up with you?" she dialed his number. A moment later, she called back. Her voice, usually steady, was shaking. I could hear the panic in every syllable as she explained that my grandma had answered the phone in a frenzy. While we were chatting about the right way to summarize a life in a few neat paragraphs, my grandpa had collapsed, out of nowhere. No warning, no signs. He'd been fine just hours earlier. The paramedics were there, scrambling to save him, pumping his chest, shouting commands. My mom stayed on the line, and I listened in stunned silence, feeling useless and small on the other end. Minutes later, they rushed him to the hospital, but it was no good. He was gone before they even made it to the emergency room. The news hit like a truck. My grandpa, who'd been puttering around his garden that morning, was gone. And the kicker? The obituary I'd slapped together in a haze of procrastination, pieced together from vague memories and secondhand stories, was the one we ended up using in the local paper. I still get a chill thinking about it. How, in the time it took to casually joke about death, it had been lurking right there in the room with him, waiting for its cue. Story 2. A few months before it happened, the whole scene had already played out in my head like some twisted preview. The crash, I mean. Every detail, right down to the grating crunch of metal, the shattered glass sprayed like confetti, the acrid stench of burning rubber that clawed at your throat. It all unfolded in a dream that felt so real I could taste the fear on my tongue when I woke up. I didn't think much of it, just a nightmare, right? You shrug it off, roll over, and forget about it. But then that day came. I was supposed to catch a ride with this girl, let's call her Jenny. She looked kind of agitated when I showed up, not her usual self, like something had crawled under her skin and wouldn't let go. She kept pushing me to find another way home, making up some excuse about not wanting to drive out of her way. I didn't pay much attention. I needed the ride, and that was that. Eventually she caved, sighing like she'd just agreed to something much bigger than a short drive. We got in the car, everything seemed fine at first, but as we hit the main road, a knot tightened in my gut. Something about the way the light cut through the windshield, the rhythm of the tires on the asphalt. Familiar. Too familiar. And then it happened. The world spun on its axis. A screech ripped through the air. Metal kissed metal with a sickening force. And the smell, God, that smell, of burning rubber and hot engine oil filled my lungs. It was the same, down to the last detail. When the car finally stopped spinning, I looked over at Jenny. She was pale, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. I blurted it out, about the dream, about how I'd seen it all happen before, as if I'd watched it play out in some warped reality. She stared at me, eyes wide, unblinking, and then told me she'd had the same dream the night before. The exact same damn. That's why she'd wanted me to get a different ride. She was trying to dodge it, to escape what she'd already seen coming. But here we were, right in the middle of it, like we'd been pulled in by some unseen hand, our fates sealed before we even got behind the wheel. It felt like the universe had played some twisted joke on us, one we didn't get the punchline to, until it was too late. Story 3. Back in college, I delivered pizzas. Easy cash, no hassle. Just me, my beat-up sedan, and a stack of boxes keeping warm on the passenger seat. One night, I got sent out on a run that should have been a breeze. A 20-minute round trip tops, the kind you barely think about. I grabbed the pie, punched the address into my phone, and hit the road. I remember leaving the store, the sound of the bell on the door jingling as I stepped out, The radio was blasting some song I can't remember now, just noise to keep me company. The streets were quiet, a few scattered headlights cutting through the darkness. I made the turns, following the directions, same as always. But then, things got fuzzy. The next thing I knew, I was pulling back into the parking lot of the shop. The tires crunched over the gravel, headlights bouncing off the dingy storefront. I felt like I'd blinked, like no time had passed at all. I parked, grabbed the empty pizza bag and walked in. But something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The manager, a grumpy guy with a mustache that looked like a caterpillar died on his lip, glanced up from the counter. His eyes narrowed. "What the hell took you so long?" he snapped. I was confused, told him it was just a normal delivery, in and out. He shook his head, pointed to the computer screen, showing I'd been gone for an hour and 7 minutes. I laughed it off at first, thinking he was messing with me, but then I saw the clock and my stomach twisted. I had no memory of that missing time, nothing, just a blank space between leaving the store and coming back. I checked my phone, but there were no missed calls, no messages, just dead silence. I asked around, checked with the customer the next day. Yeah, they got their pizza, everything was fine, but I couldn't recall a single second of that delivery. No streets, no houses, no exchange of cash, just a void. And before you ask, no, it wasn't aliens. No weird marks, no lost time probing or whatever, and I wasn't on anything, never touched drugs or booze. It's been 20 years and I still can't explain it. It's like that chunk of time got swallowed up by the universe, and it never bothered to spit it back out. Story 4. It started in the shower. Water pounding against my back, steam swirling around, the usual routine. I'd been in there maybe 10 minutes when I heard it. A sharp metallic ping that cut through the hiss of the water. I glanced down and saw it. A penny, sitting there on the tile like it had just dropped from the ceiling. I stood there for a second, blinking, trying to figure out how in the hell a penny ended up in my shower. No logical answers came to mind, but I picked it up, half laughing at the absurdity. Figured, why not? Could be good luck or something. So I kept it, slipped it into the side pouch of my wallet, zipped it up and forgot about it for a while. For years, it just sat there, my little secret. I wasn't about to tell anyone about a random penny that appeared out of nowhere. Who would care? It seemed silly, even to me. Just one of those quirky things you keep to yourself. Fast forward a few years, and I'm at a music festival with some friends. We'd been drinking, dancing, doing the usual festival stuff. One morning, we all wake up in the tent, heads throbbing, mouths dry, clothes smelling like sweat and campfire. One of the girls, still half asleep, suddenly sits up, swearing and fumbling around. Turns out she's found a penny lodged in her butt crack. Of course, we all lose it, laughing so hard the tent practically shakes. It was all just a funny, weird moment until something clicked in my brain. The penny. My penny. I scrambled for my wallet, heart thumping a little harder than it should. I unzipped the side pouch and sure enough, the damn thing was gone. My fingers felt around the empty space, searching for the familiar little coin that had been there for years, but it wasn't there. I told my friends, my voice sounding more serious than I intended. I told them how I'd kept that penny since it fell into my shower out of nowhere. They just laughed harder, rolling their eyes, saying I was full of it. The girl tossed the penny out of the tent and that was that. They didn't care, and honestly, neither did I, at least not enough to go chasing after it. But every now and then, I think about that stupid penny and how it somehow went from my zipped-up wallet to some girl's butt crack at a music festival. I don't know where it came from or where it went. Story 5. Phil was the kind of guy who you thought would always be around, a solid fixture in the landscape of your life. Until he wasn't. One day, the news hit, Phil had killed himself, and just like that, he was gone. I never really knew the details, only that it happened at some park nearby. The whole thing felt surreal, like a bad plot twist in a movie, where you know the ending, but you can't quite accept it. 6 years passed. Life kept rolling forward. One night, I was asleep beside my ex-wife, lost in some run-of-the-mill dream. Nothing special, just the usual fragmented nonsense that your brain throws together at 3 a.m. I was at a store, wandering through aisles of God knows what, when I saw him, Phil, right there, standing like he was browsing for snacks or something. It felt like someone had flipped a switch. The dream snapped into focus, sharp and vivid, like I'd been pulled into another reality altogether. He looked exactly like I remembered him. Same shaggy hair, same easy smile. "Hey man," he said, like no time had passed. His voice was clear, familiar, like we'd just seen each other yesterday. Everything around us shifted, the dream turning crystal clear, the colors more intense, the air thicker somehow. I felt my heartbeat pick up, a mix of confusion and something else, something I couldn't quite place. I asked if it was really him, and he nodded, said it was, and that we were going to hang out for a while. So we did, like old times. He showed me how to make things appear out of thin air, how to manipulate the dream. We messed around, flying, moving through walls, all that impossible stuff that felt as easy as breathing in this strange, lucid world we were in. But then, I felt it. The dream was fading. I could feel the pull of reality creeping back in, tugging at the edges. I turned to Phil, feeling this weird urgency. "Am I about to wake up?" I asked. He nodded, like he'd known all along. He said he'd had fun, said he just wanted to hang out for a bit. I don't know why, but I blurted out, "Why'd you do it, man? Why'd you kill yourself?" The way he answered knocked the wind out of me. "My girlfriend cheated on me, man." His tone was flat, like he'd repeated it 100 times, like it was something he'd rehearsed over and over, the kind of answer that just rolled off the tongue without thought. "Sophie? Sophie cheated on you?" I pressed, feeling the words catch in my throat. His eyes flickered, a brief spark, like he hadn't expected me to know her name. "Hey, man, Sophie cheated on me?" We hugged, the kind you give when you know it's the last one, and he wished me well. Then I woke up, heart racing, the room dark and silent except for the slow, steady breathing of my ex-wife beside me. I felt weird, unsettled. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, and thought, "Phil, if that was really you, give me a sign." No sooner had I finished that thought than my phone started ringing, loud in the dead of night, the screen lighting up with unknown number. It only rang twice. I wasn't dreaming anymore. My ex-wife stirred beside me, mumbling sleepily, asking who would call at this hour. I had no answer, just a chill that ran deep, all the way to my bones. Even now, when I think back on it, the memory still makes my skin crawl. Story 6. I was 15, shoveling cereal into my mouth one morning, barely awake, the house quiet except for the crunching. My spoon slipped from my hand, tumbling through the air in a slow-motion arc. I watched it, eyes tracking its descent as it headed toward the linoleum. Then it hit the floor, or at least it should have. But the damn thing just disappeared. 1 second it was there, mid-fall, and the next it was gone. Not a sound, not a bounce, nothing. I blinked, thinking I'd just missed where it went. But the more I stared, the more it felt like I'd just watched something impossible happen. I got up and looked around, half expecting to find it lying somewhere nearby, wedged under the fridge or stuck between the cabinet and the stove. But it wasn't anywhere. I scoured the floor, crouched down, peering into every nook and cranny, moving things around, checking the corners, even the trash can. Nothing. I retraced the spoon's flight path over and over in my head, trying to figure out where it could have bounced to, but it didn't make any sense. I spent half an hour like that, crawling on my hands and knees, looking under the table, the chairs, everything. I pulled out drawers, checked under the fridge with a flashlight, even felt around in the darkness behind the dishwasher. But it was gone. Just gone. A spoon doesn't just disappear. Things don't just vanish into thin air. I felt this weird tension, the kind that creeps in when something doesn't add up. A stupid spoon shouldn't have rattled me like that, but it did. I checked again, slower this time, looking for any sign I might have missed. I moved things that hadn't been moved in years, dusted off cobwebs from corners I'd never bothered to look at. Still nothing. Not a clue, not a sign, not even a faint clink that might suggest it had slid into some hidden crevice. Eventually, I gave up, sat back down and finished the cereal with another spoon, the room feeling strangely still. But the thought nagged at me, kept poking at the back of my brain, reminding me how something so simple had become so damn strange. I never found that spoon. Not that day, not ever. It just vanished, like it had never existed. Story 7. I was out with my dog, the air cool and the streetlights flickering against the darkening sky. It was one of those routine walks, nothing special. Just him sniffing every blade of grass, me holding his leash with one hand, checking my phone with the other. On the leash, there was this little plastic attachment that held the poop bags, a clunky thing that always bounced around whenever he pulled too hard. At one point, I dropped the leash, felt the slack slip from my fingers, heard that unmistakable clatter as the plastic hit the pavement. I saw it fall, even heard the faint sound of plastic hitting the concrete, the kind of noise that barely registers but tells you something's hit the ground. I bent down to pick it up, expecting to feel the leash in my hand again, but when I looked, it wasn't on the ground at all. Instead, the leash was right there in my grip, as if it had never left. My fingers clenched around it, the plastic holder dangling, swaying back and forth like it always did. I stood there, frozen, trying to piece together what had just happened. I had felt it leave my hand, watched it drop, heard it hit the ground. I was sure of it. And yet, here it was, back where it started, like the whole thing had rewound itself in the blink of an eye. I looked around, half expecting someone to pop out from behind a bush, a hidden camera crew laughing at the confused look on my face. But it was just me and the dog, who was still nose deep in a patch of grass, completely oblivious. I shook the leash a little, the plastic holder making its usual hollow rattle, the sound that I knew I'd heard a second ago, but from the ground. My hand tingled with this odd sensation, a lingering unease, like it was holding on to something that defied logic. I glanced around again, just the empty street, the distant hum of a car, the dim glow of the street. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the leash in my hand, the plastic holder swinging slightly with the motion of my dog pulling forward, ready to move on. I gave in, shrugged, and started walking again, feeling like I'd just stepped out of some invisible glitch, something that I couldn't quite explain but also couldn't shake. It was as if reality had hiccuped, just for a second, enough to make me wonder if everything I knew about how the world worked had missed some critical detail. Story 8. It was an ordinary afternoon. Just my daughter and me, lounging on the couch. She was younger then, with a head full of curls and that boundless curiosity kids have. We were flipping through TV channels. The house settled into that comfortable quiet where every creak and whisper feels like part of the background noise. And then, out of nowhere, we heard it. A single, distinct pop, like the sound of a popcorn kernel bursting in a microwave. We both paused, listening. A few seconds later, another pop, then another. It wasn't rapid, just a pop here and there, like someone had thrown a handful of kernels in the microwave and set it on low. My daughter glanced up at me, eyes wide, her expression asking if I heard it too. I nodded, listening to the strange, scattered popping sounds filling the living room. And then the smell hit us. Buttered popcorn, rich and unmistakable. It flooded the room in waves, like someone had just pulled a steaming bag fresh out of the microwave. I instinctively glanced toward the kitchen, but the microwave was dark, lifeless, its door closed. The scent wasn't drifting from there. It was thick in the living room, hanging in the air like a fog. I got up, moving around the room, sniffing like a bloodhound trying to find the source. It made no sense. No one had made popcorn. The microwave didn't smell like it. I even opened it up to check, sticking my head inside like an idiot, but nothing. It was just the living room. I bent down, opened the heating vents, half expecting to find a bag of popcorn stuffed inside, but they were empty. Just dust and a faint, metallic tang. The popping continued, a random burst here, a pause, then another pop, like the sound was bouncing off the walls, toying with us. My daughter's face was a mix of fascination and confusion, her nose twitching with each new wave of buttery smell. I looked at her and shook my head, shrugging as if to say, I've got nothing. I walked over to the windows, cracked them open to let the fresh air in, hoping it would clear the smell, but the buttery scent held its ground, lingering as the popping sounds gradually faded into the background, like a phantom retreating back into the shadows. I turned off the TV, thinking maybe it was coming from some weird ad or interference, but the room fell into silence, the smell still heavy around us. If it had been just the smell, I could have blamed it on a trick of the mind, a stray whiff from somewhere outside. If it had been just the sound, maybe some creaking pipes or a neighbor microwaving something. But both together, in the living room and nowhere else, felt like a riddle with no answer. a strange little moment that didn't quite fit into the fabric of the day. We sat there for a while, me and my daughter, waiting for something else to happen, some clue to show itself, but nothing did. The smell eventually faded, and the room returned to its regular mundane self. But for a while there, it was like we'd been caught in a tiny glitch, a weird little twist of reality, where things didn't quite line up. Story 9. I was out on my porch one afternoon, enjoying the quiet. My debit card sat on the glass table in front of me, nothing else around it. Just me, the breeze, and that damn card. I got up to grab a drink from inside, leaving the card where it was, the patio furniture still in sight from the kitchen window. My yard was boxed in by a 6-foot privacy fence, and I lived alone, so I didn't think twice about leaving it there. I came back outside, glass of water in hand, and stopped dead in my tracks. The card was gone. I stared at the empty spot on the table, blinking, waiting for my brain to catch up. I checked under the table, around the chairs, thinking it might have blown away or slid off somehow, but there was nowhere for it to go. The porch was screened, the table clear, and the card was just gone. I felt a twinge of panic but brushed it off. I figured maybe I had absent-mindedly picked it up and put it somewhere else. So I tore apart the porch, removed the cushions, looked under the chairs, and scoured every corner. I went inside and did the same. Searched every drawer, flipped the cushions on the couch, emptied my bag. Nothing. That card had vanished into thin air. I spent hours retracing my steps, checking places I knew it couldn't be, just in case. When that turned up nothing, I expanded my search to the yard, even though it made no sense for it to be there. After 2 days of this insanity, I gave up, canceled the card, requested a new one, and tried to let it go. 2 weeks passed. I went out to the porch like I always did, same routine, same chair, same glass table. I sat down, glanced at the table, and there it was. The card, just sitting there in the exact spot where it had disappeared. I stared at it, my mind racing to piece together some logical explanation, but there was none. I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew I'd searched this table, this porch 100 times over, and it was always empty. There was no way I could have missed it. The table was clear every single day, nothing on it, and now, out of nowhere, the card was back like it had never left. I picked it up, felt its familiar weight, checked the numbers. Same card, no transactions, just as I'd left it. It was like it had slipped out of existence for a bit, taken a vacation to some other dimension, and decided to come back on its own terms. Story 10. I'd always found that Google Cards feature to be a nuisance, the way it would buzz with useless updates like 15 minutes to home whenever I was out somewhere. It felt like my phone was trying to be too clever for its own good, guessing where I wanted to go before I even thought about it. So I kept it switched off. Didn't need that kind of digital babysitting. For months, I didn't see a single notification, nothing. And then, one random night as I was sitting at home, the damn thing popped up out of nowhere. 35 minutes to home, it read, pinning me at some intersection I'd never heard of on the far side of town, First St. and Story. I squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't been anywhere near that place, didn't even know where it was. So I checked the card setting, ready to turn the feature off again, except it already was. Weird. But I shrugged it off. Tech glitch, I figured. Maybe the app was acting up. I let it go and moved on with my night. The next evening, the same thing happened. 35 minutes to home from First St. Story. My phone buzzed, and there it was staring at me like it had a point to make. Again, I checked the settings. Still off. No reason I should be getting any notifications. I started to feel a little unsettled, that creeping sense that something wasn't quite right, but I pushed it to the back of my mind. A few days later, I was out running errands with a friend. We were chatting, lost in conversation, when he suddenly missed his exit. "Damn," he muttered, taking the next one to loop back around. As we pulled off the freeway and wound through a few unfamiliar streets, I looked around and asked, "Where are we? I've never been over here." And then, out of nowhere, a car on our right turned sharply left, coming right at us. There was no time to react. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and the world spun. The other car smashed into our wheel, screwing it up so bad we couldn't turn. My friend managed to pull us over to the curb, and we sat there, stunned, trying to make sense of it. Our kids were in the back, scared but unharmed, and I pulled out my phone to call my sister for a ride. She picked up, her voice calm amidst the chaos, and asked where we were. I looked up, dazed, scanning for a street sign. There it was, clear as day. First, I felt a cold wave wash over me. My stomach dropped. I had never been there before, but somehow, my phone knew days before we ever found ourselves here, pinned at that random intersection, as if it had been waiting. Story 11. I was about 11 or 12, back in the early 70s, when my dad came home one Friday with a surprise announcement. We were going to Kings Island the next day. It was a brand new amusement park, the kind of place kids talked about like it was the promised land. My first thought was how much fun it'd be if my best friend Chris could come along. I begged my dad to let me invite him, and after some eye-rolling and dad-o grumbling, he finally said yes, as long as Chris could cover his own ticket. Without wasting a second, I raced to the kitchen, grabbed the phone from its cradle on the wall, and pressed it to my ear. The line was dead, no dial tone. I started to hang up, but then I heard it. Hello? I froze for a second. Hello? I said back, waiting for a response, feeling a weird flutter in my stomach. _I_God, is that you? Came the voice on the other end. Chris? I stuttered, surprised. I was just calling you. What's up? There was a brief pause, and then Chris, sounding as incredulous as I felt, said, Well, I was calling to ask if you'd like to come to Kings Island tomorrow, but you have to pay your own way. I just stood there, staring at the phone in my hand like it had suddenly grown two heads. The receiver felt cold against my ear, my fingers gripping the cord like it might slip away. The line hadn't even rung. I hadn't dialed a single number, and yet, here we were, both on the phone at the same time, saying the exact same thing, word for word. It was like some bizarre cosmic coincidence had synced us up perfectly. I could almost picture Chris on his end, probably sitting at his kitchen table with that same stunned look on his face, his mom's ancient avocado green phone cradled in his hand. The silence hung there for a second, just the faint sound of breathing on both ends of the line, both of us trying to process what had just happened. We laughed it off, made our plans, but even as I hung up the phone, I kept looking at it like it might offer some explanation. No phone ever rang. Neither of us had even finished dialing. We'd just connected, somehow, both thinking the same thing, both reaching out at the exact same moment with the exact same words. It's the kind of thing that makes you wonder if there's more going on behind the scenes than we'll ever know. Two kids, two phones, one impossible call that lined up like magic. Story 12. Rig yard shift. Just me, a concrete guard shack, and the darkness outside pressing in. The place is quiet, the kind of quiet that sits heavy on your chest. Every so often, a truck driver might roll in with a late load, but mostly it's just me and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The guard shack is simple. 4 walls of concrete with sliding glass doors on either side. No locks, just tracks that squeal whenever I push them open. Huge windows front and back, turning the place into a fishbowl under the security lights. I spend most nights glancing at the monitors, a dozen screens showing every corner of the yard, every entrance, every shadowed corner. Sometimes, though, when the place feels especially empty, something catches my eye. I'll be staring at the screen, maybe zoning out a little, when I see it. A shadow, a figure, something moving past the shack. Just a glimpse in the reflection. A shape that's there and gone before I can even turn my head. I look up, expecting to see someone walking by, but there's nothing. No one out there but me. The lights from the building cast long shadows across the pavement, and I feel that cold trickle of unease slip down my spine. I flick my gaze back to the monitors, scanning every camera feed, looking for any movement, any sign that someone's out there. But there's nothing. Not a single person in sight. I tell myself it's just my eyes playing tricks, a trick of the light or some stray reflection. But it happens again. Another night, another shift, and I see it again. The same motion, a shape slipping past the glass doors like it's in a hurry to get somewhere. This time I move quicker, darting around the corner of the shack, hoping to catch whoever or whatever it is. But there's nothing there, just the cool night air and the distant hum of a truck engine idling somewhere in the lot. Back inside, I rewind the footage. Every inch of this place is under surveillance, every door, every walkway all covered. I check the timestamps, watch the feeds carefully. No one shows up on the screens. Not a soul. It's just me, sitting in that shack, the lights glaring bright, the darkness thick just outside the windows. The reflections keep coming, sometimes more than once a night. A flicker of movement, a figure darting past, always just in the corner of my eye. I've even gotten up a few times, stepped outside, hoping to catch whatever it is. But there's nothing. Not on the footage, not in the yard, just the same eerie emptiness. And it keeps happening. I don't know what it is. I'm not one for ghost stories or superstitions, but there's something about those reflections that feels wrong, like I'm catching glimpses of something I'm not supposed to see, something that doesn't belong. Story 13. I had this dream once, years ago, about some random kid dancing at a packed party. It wasn't one of those dreams that fades when you wake up. It stuck with me, burned into my brain for some reason. The kid was wearing a blue shirt and black pants, his hair in that swoopy Bieber style that was all the rage back then. He was bouncing around, caught in the swirl of movement, with a purple strobe light flicking on the wall behind him, throwing weird shadows across the room. I woke up, thought, well, that was weird, and then forgot about it. Just another random bit of dream nonsense. Years pass. Life moves on. The dream fades to the back of my mind. Just another piece of the foggy past. Then, I find myself at my cousin's wedding reception. A place packed with people and music blasting loud enough to shake the walls. The kind of place where you can feel the bass thumping in your chest, where the drinks flow and everyone is caught up in the celebration. I'm chilling with another cousin, the night rolling on. A song comes on, one of those tracks that makes everyone jump to their feet, and we start hopping up and down, caught in the beat. The lights are low, the dance floor crowded, everyone moving together in this frantic blur of motion. And then, in a flash, it hits me. I feel my stomach drop. I'm reliving that dream, the one from years ago. Everything is exactly the same, the clothes, the hair, the purple strobe light flickering against the wall, casting those same dancing shadows that I remembered from that dream. I stop for a second, blinking hard, trying to process what's happening. I look over, and there he is, the same kid from the dream, down to the last detail, dancing like he hasn't got a care in the world. It's surreal. The music, the colors, the light, all of it lines up perfectly. I feel this weird sense of déjà vu wash over me, stronger than anything I've felt before. I've been here, done this, seen this exact scene play out in my head years before it happened. It's like I've stepped into a memory I never knew I had, reliving a moment I'd already seen in some strange, subconscious flash. The rest of the night goes by and everything else feels normal, just another wedding reception. But that moment, those few seconds when reality lined up perfectly with a long-forgotten dream, sticks with me. It's like a crack in the fabric of time, a glimpse into something I can't explain, a reminder that sometimes the weirdest dreams aren't just dreams at all. Story 14. Back when we first got together, I'd gone out and bought my boyfriend a few new shirts. We were fresh into that whole head over heels thing, when everything feels electric and stupidly perfect, and you find yourself doing ridiculous things like buying them clothes just because a shirt in the store made you think of them. I remember seeing this one shirt, a plain white tee with the words, "Love Life," printed across the front in big, bold red letters. It was an inside joke between us. We'd started saying it to describe everything about us, about the way we felt, like some kind of mantra, "Love Life." It sounded simple, cheesy, but it worked for us. We even named our small business after it. He loved that shirt, wore it all the time, until eventually it ended up in the back of the closet, forgotten as the years went by. Fast forward a couple of years, and "Love Life" was the last phrase I'd use to describe our relationship. The guy turned out to be a nightmare, controlling, manipulative, and a full-blown asshole. Our business was tanking, our relationship was crumbling, and I was left questioning everything I thought I knew. One day, I decided to clean out the closets, hoping to clear out the mess, both literally and metaphorically. I'm going through all the old clothes, pulling out stuff to donate when I find the shirt again. But something's wrong. I stare at it for a second, blinking like I can't trust my eyes. The shirt doesn't say "Love Life" anymore. It says "Low Life." Same shirt, same bold red letters, but the words have changed, like some cruel joke. I feel my heart start racing, this cold sweat breaking out on my skin. I know that shirt. I bought it. I remember the moment I picked it out thinking it was perfect. There's no way in hell I would have bought a shirt that said "low life" for anyone, let alone the guy I thought I was in love with. I called him in, asking if he remembers the shirt, if he remembers what it said. He doesn't even hesitate. "Love life," he says. I hold it up to show him and he loses it. Eyes wide, mouth hanging open. He's as freaked out as I am. We both knew it had never said that. Never. The shirt had changed, morphed into something else entirely, like reality had bent to match the person he'd become. It felt like I'd slipped into some alternate universe, one where he was this version of himself. A complete lowlife. The shirt was a message, a warning, like some glitch in the universe had decided to set the record straight. Story 15. It started like any ordinary day. My dog Coda, a spry little thing with boundless energy, trotted into my room and tried to jump on my bed. She struggled for a second, paws scraping against the sheets, but finally made it up. I gave her a gentle nudge, just enough to get her off, and she hopped back down and wandered off, her tail wagging as she left the room. Not long after, I heard my phone buzzing downstairs. I headed down and saw my grandma's name flashing on the screen. She'd cooked up some food and wanted me to swing by. Sounded like a plan, so I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and Coda's leash. Figured I'd take her along for the ride. We got in the car, Coda in the back, and drove the 10 minutes to my grandma's place. Everything was normal. We pulled up and Coda bounded out ahead of me, eager to explore. We went inside, chatted, ate, had a good time. A while later, I decided it was time to head home, but when I called for Coda, she didn't come. I checked the backyard first, thinking she was sniffing around, but nothing. I called her name, my voice echoing against the quiet of the evening. Checked the front yard, up and down the street. Nothing. Panic started to creep in, that gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. I spent the next hour combing through the neighborhood, my calls growing louder and more desperate as the sun dipped lower in the sky. No sign of her anywhere. By 9:30, the light had faded, and I had no choice but to head home. I figured I'd come back in the morning and try again. Sleep was restless, filled with worry. But then I woke to the sound of something downstairs. I got up, headed down the stairs, and there was Coda, sitting in the living room, her tail thumping happily against the floor. I just stood there, my mind spinning. Had I imagined the whole thing? I was sure she'd been with me, sure she'd gone missing. I decided to drive back to my grandma's to clear my head and get the whole story straight. When I got there, I told my grandma what happened, about Coda showing up at home somehow. As I finished explaining, I began to second-guess myself. Did I even bring her with me in the first place? I asked my grandma and she confirmed it, said I did bring Coda, pointed out the leash I'd left behind on her living room couch. Still baffled, I asked if we could check the security footage from her cameras. We went through it frame by frame, searching for any sign of Coda outside, on the street, leaving the house. Anything. But there was nothing. No Coda running around, no door opening, just footage of me walking into the house with Coda, clear as day. I drove back home, more confused than ever. When I got there, Coda was still there, sitting right where I'd left her, as if she'd never been gone. It didn't add up. It still doesn't. She was with me and then she wasn't, but somehow, she was home all along. Even now, I have no explanation for how my dog seemed to be in two places at once. No clue how she ended up back home without ever leaving my side, or how she made it through a night that left no trace, no evidence, except for the missing time between the moments. Story 16. Back in October 2005, I met the woman who'd eventually become my wife. We'd hooked up on a Saturday night at a gig in the city, one of those electrifying nights where everything clicks and the world feels a little brighter, a little more alive. We hit it off, exchanged numbers, and made plans to meet up again the following Wednesday night for a beer or a coffee. Nothing too serious, just a chance to see where things might go. Never before does an accident happen that beautiful bring to mind a memory I'd never forget.
But Wednesday morning rolled around and I felt like death. I'd been out the night before for my birthday, celebrating hard with my buddies, drinking, getting high, the usual debauchery. By the time the sun rose, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My head throbbed, my body ached, and I had this gnawing feeling that I'd make a complete fool of myself if I showed up looking like something the cat dragged in. I wanted to see her, but not like that. I was dreading having to call her and postpone, worried she'd think I was blowing her off or wasn't interested. That afternoon, my old Nokia phone rang, and I picked it up without thinking, not even registering the number on the tiny, dim screen. A girl's voice came through the line. She asked if I'd mind taking a rain check on our date that night. She said she was tired from work and was hoping we could push it to the following weekend instead. I couldn't believe my luck. Relief washed over me, and I quickly agreed, saying it was no problem at all. And honestly, I was just grateful not to have to make that awkward call myself. We met up that Friday, just like we planned, and as we talked, I felt like we were hitting it off even better than before. At some point, I mentioned I was glad she'd called to postpone because I'd been feeling so rough that Wednesday. She looked at me, eyebrows furrowed in confusion, and said she hadn't called me at all. She'd been expecting me to call and had thought I'd just blown her off. When I didn't. It threw me for a loop. I told her I'd gotten a call, but she was adamant it wasn't her. She'd assumed I was being an asshole until I called the next day to set up the new date. I checked my phone later, and sure enough, there was a record of a call from that Wednesday afternoon, 3 minutes long, the number blocked. I never did dig deeper, never thought to call the cell company and ask for details. At the time, it was just a weird little mystery that I shrugged off. But now, years down the line, married with kids, I find myself thinking about it from time to time, replaying that strange moment over in my head. Someone called me, someone who sounded just like her, who somehow knew exactly what to say, what to ask. And it feels like one of those weird moments where the universe nudged things in a certain direction, like some cosmic matchmaker decided to intervene. I can't shake the thought that maybe someone or something out there was making sure we got another chance. Maybe it was some bizarre coincidence, or maybe, just maybe, it was a bit of Marty McFly back to the future kind of stuff, a little nudge from a different timeline. Who knows? But it's the kind of thing that makes you wonder if we're all just following a script written somewhere out there in the ether, with someone occasionally stepping in to make sure we hit our marks. Story 17. I was deep in a Minecraft session with some friends, chatting away over Skype, my desktop humming steadily under the desk. We were in the zone, building and exploring, when suddenly I disconnected from the game. A bit annoying, but it happens. The weird part was that my browser wasn't working either. I couldn't get anything to load, but I was still on Skype, still chatting with everyone like nothing had happened. I got up, muttering something about checking the router, figuring it might have decided to take a nap on me. I walked over, glanced at the lights. Everything seemed fine. No blinking, no warning signs. I headed back to my desk, still talking with my friends, and asked what I should do next. Someone on the call joked, "Check if it's actually plugged in." I laughed, about to say something smartass like, "How am I still talking to you then?" When I glanced down and saw it, my Ethernet cable, my lifeline to the digital world, was dangling loose, about 2 centimeters away from the port on the back of my computer. I froze for a second, staring at that little gap like it was something impossible. Then I announced to everyone, "Guys, the Ethernet cable's not even plugged in." And just like that, the Skype call dropped. Dead silence. For a moment, I just stood there, dumbfounded, the little green light on the cable flickering in my hand like it was mocking me. I wasn't on Wi-Fi. My motherboard didn't even have a Wi-Fi option. There was no hidden card, no backup connection. I'd checked 100 times before. My partner at the time saw the whole thing unfold too, which was a small comfort. At least I wasn't. For years, the whole thing nagged at me. I turned the possibilities over in my mind, trying to find some logical explanation. I even considered some wild theories, like covert surveillance equipment secretly installed on my PC, routing my connection through some hidden medium. Then I saw a demo where someone managed to intercept a VGA cable from across the room. picking up the picture just from the signal leakage. It gave me a sliver of a plausible explanation, maybe enough to calm my nerves a bit. Maybe somehow the Voight part of the connection managed to jump that tiny gap, just enough to keep me connected until I announced the absurdity of it. Um, but even now, I'm not completely sure. No Wi Fi, no secret connections, no plausible reason why I was still talking to my friends with the Ethernet cable lying unplugged on the floor. It's just one of those weird moments where the lines between the real and the surreal blur, and you're left with nothing but questions that no one can answer. Story 18. It was late, one of those nights when the campus felt like a ghost town. My friend and I were making our way back to the dorms, laughing over some dumb joke that seemed way funnier than it probably was. The campus was still, the kind of stillness that makes every sound sharp, every movement exaggerated. We were about half a mile from our building when we noticed something. A man, a black man, dressed in torn clothes, running straight at us, full speed. Instinctively, we slowed down, not sure what the hell was going on. He kept coming, and as he got closer, his face came into view under the streetlight. His eyes were wide, like he'd seen something that had shaken him to his core. He didn't seem to notice us. His focus was straight ahead, like we weren't even there. As he sprinted past, we caught a glimpse of the strange object in his hands, a large bowl filled with fruit, the kind you'd see on a kitchen table, not clutched in the hands of a man running for his life. In the dead of night, we stood there, stunned, watching him disappear down the path. I remember thinking, what the hell is he running from? We turned back to where he had come from and saw it, a small, dark shape, moving fast, coming toward us. At first, it looked like a bear cub, but that didn't make any sense. Not here, not in the middle of a college campus. My heart started pounding as we watched it run in our direction, its movements frantic, erratic. We took a few steps back, ready to bolt. But then, just as we were about to take off after the guy with the fruit bowl, the thing changed direction. It darted to the left, making a beeline for the curb near what looked like a sewer drain. We watched, and I swear, the closer it got to the drain, the smaller it seemed to get. From the size of a cub, it shrank down smaller and smaller until it was no bigger than a mouse. It slipped right through the metal grate, disappearing into the darkness below. We stared, trying to make sense of what we'd just seen. Slowly, cautiously, we approached the curb, peering down at the drain. But as we got closer, something shifted, like the world itself was changing in front of our eyes. By the time we were right next to it, there was no drain, no grate, just solid concrete. We stood there for a moment, both of us speechless, the chill of the night suddenly feeling a whole lot colder. Without a word, we turned and continued back to the dorms, our earlier laughter long gone, replaced by a heavy silence. We didn't talk about it for the rest of the walk, and honestly, I don't think we wanted to. Story 19. About a year ago, I started this little board and card game club. It was just a handful of us at first, meeting up to play whatever we could get our hands on. Lately, we've been obsessed with Agricola, a game where you build up a farm from scratch, planting crops, raising livestock, all that good stuff. For some reason, whenever we play, I catch myself humming Killing in the Name by Rage Against the Machine. It's like a weird habit, and I always end up singing the same line. Now you do what they told you. A little ironic anthem for a game about farming, I guess. One of the guys from the club, a buddy who's become a bit of a regular, had a trip planned with some friends to another city. While they were there, they stumbled upon a board game store that let people play games in store. Naturally, they found a copy of Agricola on the shelf, and he convinced his friends to give it a shot. So they're setting up, laying out all the little wooden pieces, and getting ready to dive in. They're just about to start when he hears it someone behind him tapping their fingers on a table, rhythmically drumming out the beat to a song he knew all too well. Then, clear as day, the guy starts humming, "Now you do what they told you." Instantly, he freezes. His first thought is that it's gotta be me, that somehow I'd shown up out of nowhere to mess with him. He spins around, half expecting to see me standing there with a smirk on my face. But instead, it's just some random dude, totally unknown to him, casually humming the same Rage Against the Machine song, tapping away like it's the most natural thing in the world. And then he's floored, staring at this stranger who's unknowingly channeling the exact same energy I do back at our club. Um, for a split second, he's genuinely spooked. Like the universe is playing some kind of joke on him. Uh, the guy doesn't even notice, just keeps humming and tapping, lost in his own world. When he told me about it later, we both laughed it off, chalking it up to one of those strange little coincidences that seem too weird to be random, but too random to be anything else. It was as if my strange habit had reached out across cities, finding a way to creep into his day, just to remind him of home. Story 20. This isn't the kind of creepy story that makes your skin crawl or sends a chill up your spine, but it's got its own kind of weirdness, a quiet, almost mystical kind of strangeness that makes you wonder if there's something bigger at play. A few years back, I lost my job, one of those days where everything seems to fall apart all at once. I walked home feeling completely drained, my mind racing with questions. What next? Where do I go from here? But instead of diving into panic mode, I decided to let it go, at least for the night. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning. No sense in ruining my sleep over something that was already done. So I morning comes, and before I even have time to brew a cup of coffee, my phone rings. I answer, still groggy, and hear a voice I don't recognize. It's a guy, a friend of my ex-boss who had just opened up his own restaurant. Out of nowhere, he asks if I want a job. No interview, no hassle, just a straightforward offer. It felt like the universe had wrapped up a solution with a neat little bow and handed it to me before I'd even had time to stress. Well, it didn't stop there. Fast forward a bit, I had found myself a new apartment just a few blocks from my old one. I was heading back to my old place to pack, and honestly, I had no idea how I was going to get everything moved on my own. But I had this odd sense of calm, this gut feeling that it would work out somehow. My phone had died, so I stopped a random guy on the street to ask what time it was. Um, Weirdly enough, he asked me what I was up to, and without thinking much of it, I told him I'm about to pack and move all my stuff to a new place. He didn't miss a beat. "I'll help you," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I should have been wary, should have hesitated at the thought of a stranger coming along to help me pack up my life, but something about it felt right. Like it was all part of the plan. Um, So he came with me. We packed up my things, loaded them up, and carried them over to my new apartment. He was kind, easygoing, and genuinely helpful. There was no ulterior motive, no weirdness, just a stranger who appeared out of nowhere at the exact moment I needed him, offering exactly what I needed. It was like everything was lining up perfectly, like the universe was placing the right people in my path just when I needed them most. It wasn't about fate or destiny in some grand, sweeping way. It was quieter than that, simpler, like the world was whispering in my ear, "Just let go and trust me, I've got you covered." Story 21. A couple months ago, I finally decided to watch Pulp Fiction. It was one of those films people kept telling me I needed to see, like some cultural rite of passage. I didn't know a thing about it beyond the name, and that it was supposed to be one of those movies you needed to watch more than once to really get it. People said it had layers, that it was all over the place, and somehow that intrigued me. Here's the thing, I've always had this strange relationship with my dreams. Sometimes I dream of these small, insignificant moments, and then days or weeks later, those moments happen in real life. Some random scene playing out exactly how it did in my sleep. That jolt of recognition, that flash of, holy fuck, deja vu. It's unnerving, but I'd gotten used to it. But then a few weeks before I watched the movie, I had this dream. In it, someone was explaining to me that a person's soul was kept in a case, and the scar on the back of this person's neck was where the soul had been removed. It seemed so specific, so odd, and yet in the dream, it made perfect sense. I woke up thinking about it, but shrugged it off, just another weird dream that would fade into the background noise of my life. Fast forward to that date night, sitting on the couch with a boy, and we decide to watch Pulp Fiction. We're halfway through the movie, and I'm trying to follow the chaotic narrative, piecing it all together when we get to the scene with the mysterious briefcase. The glow, the way everyone seems mesmerized by it. My date turns to me and casually asks, "So, what do you think is in the case?" Hmm? Before I could even think of an answer, he says, "Some people say it's the character's soul, and that's why he has a scar on the back of his neck. That's where it was removed." I froze. My whole body tensed up as I stared at him. It was exactly what I'd heard in my dream, down to the detail. The scar, the soul, everything. I could feel my face change, a mix of confusion and disbelief that I couldn't hide. He noticed, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't even explain it. How could I? It wasn't just another deja vu moment. It wasn't some random coincidence or a fleeting deja vu where I half recognized something mundane. It was as if I had dreamed about this specific plot point, something I had never heard of, never seen, weeks before I even watched the movie. It felt like I'd been let in on some cosmic secret, like the universe had spurred the answer to a question and I didn't even know was coming. Story 22. In my early 20s, I used to dream things before they happened, not just regular dreams, but vivid ones that would stick with me, replaying in my mind like a movie on loop, details sharp enough to cut. It happened often enough that I started to wonder if I had some strange sixth sense or if the universe was playing some kind of game with me. There was one dream that stands out. I'd been in a car accident not long before and had to tie the hood of my car down with metal wiring to keep it from popping up while I drove. I dreamed I was on the road, the Arizona sun blazing, the heat so intense you could feel it warping the air. In the dream, I saw the metal wire start to melt, the heat eating through it like acid, and then suddenly the hood flew up, blocking my view. I woke up, heart pounding, thinking it was just another one of those weird dreams. The next day, I was driving, the sun beating down hard, and I started picturing that same scene in my head, wondering if it could really get that hot. Then, just like in the dream, the metal snapped. The hood flew up, slammed against my windshield, and cracked the glass. I couldn't see a damn thing in front of me, blinded by the white of the hood. My heart was racing as I navigated with just my side and rearview mirrors, managing to pull over safely. Um, it felt like I had lived that moment twice. The dream had warned me, almost like it had tried to prepare me. I felt the strange mix of fear and fascination that always came after one of these dreams came true, like a sense of knowing that made no sense. And it wasn't just that one time. Every time my best friend from junior high calls, I dream of her the night before. It's like clockwork. I could go months without a word from her, but if I dream about her, the phone rings the next day, and there she is, her voice crackling through the line, like we've somehow connected in our sleep. It happened again just recently. I had a dream about my older brother, the one I don't talk to often. Um, in the dream, we were just there together, a weirdly mundane but intense feeling hanging between us. I woke up, brushed it off, but not an hour later, my phone buzzed. And there was his name lighting up the screen. It's the bad dreams that get to me most, though. When they're vivid like that, I can't help but think they're going to come true, too. I've had enough of them play out in real life that I've stopped brushing them off as coincidences. It feels like I'm carrying around a piece of the future in my head, a sneak peek at something I don't always want to see. When those dreams come, the ones with that dark, heavy feeling, I brace myself. I never know what's coming, only that something probably is. Story 20. I had this dream once. It was me and my dad. We were in the car driving, and suddenly there was an oncoming semi truck barreling down the road straight toward us. I was behind the wheel, but weirdly, I was driving on the left side of the road, which didn't make sense to me at the time. Everything in that dream felt so real. The jolt of fear in my chest, the sound of the tire screeching, the blinding headlights filling the windshield. The moment of impact was right there, suspended in front of me. And then I woke up, heart pounding, just before we would have died. I didn't think much of it after that. It was just a dream, unsettling, but easy to brush off in the light of day. A year went by, life moving on as usual. Then it was Christmas 2016, and my dad was on a business trip in Australia. I remember waiting for him to come back, expecting his call to say he'd landed, imagining the smile in his voice, maybe a story about the flight. But instead, the phone rang, and the voice on the other end wasn't his. And my dad had been in a car accident, they said, a head-on collision with a semi truck. He'd made it to the hospital, but he didn't make it out. I felt my breath catch in my throat, a wave of cold washing over me. It was like the room spun for a second. Everything tilted off its axis. When I saw the photos, something inside me broke loose. The semi, the street, the curve in the road. It was exactly the same as in my dream, down to the smallest details. The truck, the road, even the angle of impact. It was like deja vu, but deeper, more chilling, like I was living the moment twice. The memory of that dream flooded back, every detail suddenly crystal clear. I remembered how real it had felt, how my hands had gripped the steering wheel, how the headlights had filled my vision. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I kept asking myself how I'd seen this coming, why I'd dreamed of this exact thing a year before it happened. I had never been to that street in my life, didn't know it existed until I saw it in those pictures. But there it was, the same truck, the same stretch of road, the same terrible moment I'd somehow already lived through in my sleep. It's the kind of thing that sits in the back of your mind, a quiet whisper of something you can't explain, the kind of thing that makes you wonder what else might be lurking in your dreams, waiting to unfold. Trilogy 24. It was one of those days that seemed destined for trouble. A rainy Friday the 13th in September, the kind of day that hangs heavy with bad omens. We were headed to a Ren fair, winding down a mountain known for its unforgiving roads, the kind of mountain that has taken lives before, claimed someone from our group already, leaving that shadow that always lingers when you drive a road like this. We'd just made it past the most dangerous stretch, but the rain had slicked the asphalt, and I felt that familiar tension in my gut. I told the driver to be careful, that people drive too fast here, especially in the rain. My eyes were locked on a curve up ahead, my senses sharp, tuning out the chatter of my friends around me. The world seemed to narrow to that single bend in the road, everything else fading away. Then it happened. A burgundy truck came around the curve too fast, tires fighting for grip. It lost control, skidding sideways, and I saw it clear as day. The bed of the truck swung around, aiming straight at us. I started screaming, knowing there was no way out, no chance of escape. The truck was coming right for us, and In that split second, I knew we were about to be T-boned. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact. I felt the first hit, a jarring crunch, the shriek of metal bending and breaking, glass shattering around us, then a second hit, as our car careened into the side of the mountain, slamming into the rock face. I opened my eyes, fully expecting to see twisted wreckage, the truck's frame still embedded in our side. But the truck was gone. It just drove off, leaving us there. Stunned, adrenaline coursing through our veins. We pulled over, shaken, waiting for the shock to wear off, and then got out, expecting to see the front of the car crushed, smashed beyond recognition. Instead, the only damage was to the driver's side mirror, fractured and dangling, knocked loose when it hit the window so hard that it cracked and fell off. All four of us felt both impacts. We heard the crunch, the metallic scream, felt the force of the collision, and we all thought this was it. We were sure we were done for. But somehow we were standing there, alive, whole, with nothing but a broken mirror to show for it. We stood there on the side of the road, rain pouring down, realizing that whatever just happened wasn't normal. It was like death had reached out, missed its mark, and left us standing on the edge of something we couldn't quite understand. And it wasn't the first time, either. I've danced with death before, felt it reach for me, for those with me, only to slip away at the last second, leaving me with this unsettling feeling that my clock should have run out long ago. That day, on that rainy mountain road, we all felt it, like we were living on borrowed time, waiting to see when the universe might come to collect.